Okay, welcome back. So when we last left off talking about architecture, I was talking about post and lintel architecture, and I was kind of rhapsodic about the Parthenon. Remember that if you want to refresh, there is in the discussion about Greek art and architecture in the previous unit, there is a lot to talk about the development of Doric and Ionic architecture leading up to the Parthenon, um, as well as then from that leading to the Hellenistic pieces like this one, the Pergamon altar, which is also a beautiful piece, not only for the frieze sculpture that runs around the side, but as a really great example of Hellenistic Ionic architecture, and it's light and beautiful. So the next major engineering issue that I want to talk about is the arch and how arch carries weight. I'm actually going to jump a couple of pages for a second, all the way to here, just to make sure, just to explain the basic structure of an arch. Okay, that and we see the beginnings of use of arch in Greek, especially Hellenistic Greek architecture, but it's really under the Romans that we see a lot of the adoption of arch as a device for formal and large-scale architecture, um, and religious architecture, and so Leonardo da Vinci had a quote about the arch where he said that an arch is two weaknesses that make a strength, and the basic idea is that it's two things that lean into each other, but because they lean into each other perfectly balanced, right, with the keystone being right in the middle of that balance, they then wind up being much stronger. Because of the reason why it's stronger is because unlike post and lintel, where the bar would go straight across and then the weight would be pressing down the middle, in an arch, the weight from the top gets distributed perfectly down to the posts. So in architecture that uses arches, like here in the Pantheon, not to be confused with the Parthenon, in the interior of the Pantheon, we have these arches. It can carry a lot more weight because of the way it so perfectly distributes the weight straight down to the posts, to the columns. And then the Romans also started to figure out that if you take an arch and you rotate it fully 360 degrees, then you would get a dome. So we have domes such as the dome here at the Pantheon. I just wanted to point out that the Pantheon is quite popular. We see it in Lego pieces, and I found this nice image of someone who'd done a really good job with the Pantheon in Minecraft. Now, getting back to the arch becomes a really important part of architecture in the early Christian architecture that we looked at, leading into the Romanesque architecture. And so here's a good example of an early Romanesque church, and its beautiful use of arches to support a straight across ceiling, not a barrel vault. Although I think the naves here on the side have a barrel vault, but I could be wrong. And these columns going this way as well. And when we look at Islamic art of about the same time period, Islamic architecture, we see an even more elaborate use of arches, and they're starting to do something with these arches that will seem somewhat familiar when we get to talk about the Gothic, which is that they're starting to play with the idea that the efficiency of the arch, the ability of it to hold a lot of weight and be relatively transparent, like not need a lot of other construction other than the arch itself to hold the weight, allows spaces with arches to start to feel a little bit lightweight. It's hard to tell here because this doesn't necessarily look all that lightweight from this image, but it does create, you start to create spaces with this impression of the weight just kind of floating upward. I think you can see that a lot more in the these pieces from Alhambra. And so, as I said, the arch leads to talking about vaults and different kind of vaulting. And so we've already talked about the arch structure here. And you could, with an arch, you can make a perfectly barrel vault, right? Which is simply you take an arch and you go straight in one direction with that, with that archway. But if you took two barrel vaults and they intersected, you would get something like a groin vault, like this. And groin vaults are strong, and they can open up the amount of space, like the interior space can get bigger with a groin vault. And then as we move into Gothic architecture and we start using both, there are two main things: the ribbing of the vault, where the actual archways get extra support, the ribbing of the vault, and then also the use of pointed archways. Both of those contribute to a Gothic space. And so one of the benefits in Gothic architecture of using these triangular based archways and then how they intersect, let me go back just for a second, is that in a perfect barrel vault, perfect circular barrel vault meet, then you have certain limitations. One of the limitations is that both barrel vaults have to be the exact same height to each other. They have to match perfectly in order for them to connect to each other, and they also have to be perfectly perpendicular to each other in order for them to connect to each other. Whereas with a Gothic ribbed vault and with these kind of triangular based archways, then you start creating spaces where you can intersect all different kinds of angles, aisles that are not lined up perfectly perpendicular or parallel to each other, and it allows you to open up the space dramatically. And you start to create these spaces where the building, if you think about it, going all the way back, right, to post and lintel architecture like here, this architecture was all about the idea of communicating the weight, making the weight believable. And then when we get to here, all of a sudden the architecture becomes about the idea of making the rise seem almost miraculous, as making the weight of the building seem to disappear. That's probably a good place to end. I'm going to cover that topic even more on the next one.